In fact, here in Hanoi, Vietnam, and in Ho Chi Minh too, there's some shops that will specialize in selling propaganda art posters. So propaganda art is actually a kind of art form, and there are people that go out that actually collect this type of art and love this kind of art. Hi, this is Anita with 5 Minutes with Art podcast. Today I want to diverge a little bit about talking about specific artists or periods of art. I want to answer the question, is communism good for the arts? Because actually, communism art, or what is known as propaganda art, is actually a form of art. And it's a very interesting form of art, especially if any of you have been like me, where you've lived in China or Vietnam, or maybe even been to the Soviet Union or other places, Russia. You would understand a bit more about propaganda art. In fact, here in Hanoi, Vietnam, and in Ho Chi Minh too, there's some shops that will specialize in selling propaganda art posters. So propaganda art is actually a kind of art form, and there are people that go out that actually collect this type of art and love this kind of art. Under communism, poets, artists, and others are always strifled with, their art was always became kind of a bit of an issue. And part of it is because communism and art do not always go hand in hand. So many of the artists under the communism era, they would refuse to do what the communist state saw as being the art, or the art that they wanted to see. And so there was always, a lot of times there's this conflict between, communism, socialism, and art and the artist. Because the problem is that, communist states is everything is about the communism itself. And there's usually a saying that says, what goes against the communist state or government, is considered to be subjective. Lenin said, "I'm no good at art. Art for me is just an appendage. And when it's used as propaganda, which we need at the moment, is over, we'll cut it out as useless. Snip, snip." So that right there shows kind of the attitude towards artists within the communist state. That as long as the art can be used for things like propaganda, then the art is good. But if the art is going to be used for subversion or for other things, or if they are not quite sure what the meaning is, then the art no longer becomes important and is no longer good. Art and artists are all about free speech. An artist wants to freely express themselves. They want to be able to have the freedom to be able to choose their art, how they're going to do their art. And so there's always this conflict that goes on between the freedom of speech in communism and the freedom of an artist. And that's one reason why many times, artists could be labeled as anti-communist, subversive, dissidents, or other things, because of the fact that communism and art are always at these odds. But that's also why we have this new form of art, which is called the propaganda art, which is basically art which the state considers to be useful and that the state likes, because this art is basically art that helps to be able to get their message across. What's interesting about this art is not necessarily the best artists who are painting it or doing it. A lot of times these can be very average artists. The good artists are not usually the ones that are out there doing the propaganda art. But there are people who basically go to college and they study and they be able to learn this propaganda art. Even still today in Vietnam, when you go out on the streets of Hanoi and other places, you go out into the countryside, you will see posters of this propaganda art. And it's almost a bit like an illustration. It's just a whole different art form. And it's basically art that has one purpose: to be able to get the message across from a communist or socialist state. So that is why, when you ask the question, is communism good for the arts? My answer would be no. It's only good for the arts if you want to be in propaganda art, or you happen to like or enjoy propaganda art. Then yes, it's great for that form of art. But for the arts itself, or for people that are creative, or for being able to allow people to be able to have some great art, or art which is considered some of the world's top art, no. That is why in a lot of communist or socialist countries, you don't see them as art centers. The art centers of the world are in places where artists are given complete freedom with their art. And that is why communism is not good for the arts, as much as in other places. It's also why you will find that many people who are artists will try to leave their countries. If they are from a communist country or socialist country, they will try to leave and go to another part of the world where they can fully be able to create their art without any type of government or other intervention. This is Anita from 5 Minutes with Art podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and consider subscribe to our podcast. Thank you so much for listening.